So watch. I mean, it's gorgeous. So how do we heal this core shame of finitude? So the only way to heal the core shame of finitude, and this is where it gets so beautiful and so hopeful and so wondrous, is that we actually need to heal our essential narrative of shame and desire, right? And it's the story we tell of shame and desire is an old story that's actually found its way and redefined the Renaissance and redefined literature. But what if we realized something else? So stay for a second. What if I actually asked myself a question? And what if the question was, why are we here? Why are we here? We're here because infinity desired finitude. Wow. Wow. We're here because infinity is not merely infinity. Infinity is what we might call together here the infinite intimate. And opposites are joined at the hip. And Kirsten's going to talk about Kundalini this afternoon, right? And Christina's going to work this infinite intimate in the body, and Kundalini is one way to engage this, and Christina's work in this shame work, right, is a key piece of engaging it in your body. And by the way, if you're online, make sure to go to Kirsten, especially, and you're here, of course, make your choice, but right, for all the online people especially, right, there's Kundalinis happening, and Kirsten's been doing really deep work with Kundalini her whole life. She's been a dancer, but she's actually the last year been kind of deep in the Kundalini work. And this afternoon, Christina is going to take this Dharma, right, into its own embodied space. Right? And so we're going to it's going to become cellular in the body. But let's just feel this for a second. Right, brothers and sisters, let's stay close. Okay, it's wild. In other words, infinity desires finitude. But at the core, there's no distinction between need and desire. The distinction between need and desire is a false distinction. Right? When your consciousness is clear, your needs and desires are the same. You need what you desire what you need. Clarified desire, not surface desire. Clarified need, not surface need. So, in other words, infinity desires finitude, meaning infinity desires us. So, in other words, why does the world exist? The world exists is because infinity was hanging out and wanted to have lunch with somebody, which is why the way I said it to a friend of mine a couple of decades back. Right? So infinity desired intimacy. Or said differently, infinity needed intimacy. In other words, deep within the very heart of the infinite are needs. Infinity is actually not without the experience of need. There's an actual experience of need in the very heart of the infinite. Infinity needs intimacy. And what that means is that infinity is so fucking powerful that he, she, it, the field, the real, allows itself to need. Meaning, if I'm powerful enough, I can surrender power. And to surrender power means I'm willing to love you so fucking much that I need you. The universal love story. Right? I love you so infinitely much. Right? I love you so insanely, right, that I'm willing to need you for realsies, ontologically. Right? I actually need you. I'm desperate for you. Chafetz HaKadosh Baruch Hu lasot dirato b'tachtonim. Right? Infinite divinity desires desperately to be incarnate, right, in the manifest. How do you know? Because here we are. I mean, it's like wild, right? Right? That's what a koan is, right? When they go to the master, right? That's how koan practice is a very important practice that's gotten lost. So the master says, what's the way? They start answering, what's the way? What's the way? Another like beautiful Zen answer, no. What's the way? Right? No. That's what they say to the master. So what does that mean? Right? So he says, well, ask me. So the student asks the master, he says, what's the way? Go! What's the way? Go! That's a koan. What's the way? Go! That's a koan. Here we are. It's a koan. Here we are. Infinity, desire and need are ontologically identical at their core. So infinity needs finitude. That's shocking. Right? There's a stirring of need, desire in the infinite. And infinity yearns for and needs intimacy. And that becomes what we call the manifest. Cha. Right? And all of a sudden I begin to understand that if I'm genuinely powerful, I can experience myself also as being powerless. And the shame of finitude just begins to dissipate because infinite power was willing to make itself powerless as an expression of ecstatic love. Right? Wow. Now let's take it even further. Let's go deeper. Can we drop in deeper just one step? So here I am, I'm a baby. And I want desperately, right, to be held by my mother. I want to be licked. I want to be held. I want to be kissed. I want to be caressed. And she never does it right. And by she, I don't mean the mother, the father, that figure. It's never done right. I never experience myself, right, as being held. And so I go through a therapeutic process my whole life to work out that, okay, and that might have validity, and sometimes that's really important to do. But I never have the experience that my need is dignified. I'm humiliated and trying to get my needs met, and my needs are sexual. And by sexual, I don't mean penetrative sex. I mean the need to be touched, to be held. We're using sexual in its broadest sense, to be nourished, right? To be kissed, to be licked, right? To be, right, that fundamental experience, right, of the universal love story alive in me, right? The embrace of my aliveness, the holding of me, right, in that core way. And I'm humiliated in getting my basic needs met. And where can I heal that? I can heal that when I reclaim my vision of desire itself. You see, in the narratives we have of desire in culture, our narratives of culture recapitulate the original double bind. Our narratives of culture shame desire. Stay with me for a second, okay? This is wild. I'm going to give you an example of a cultural double bind that'll flip your mind. So take Star Wars. Take Star Wars. There's one sexual moment in all of Star Wars. Jedi Knights are not allowed to marry. They have no Eros. They have only agape. They're in service to. When was the last time you saw Obi-Wan Kenobi making out with someone? Never happens. There's only one scene of a kind of desirous person, happens to be a woman in a kind of bikini pinup, which is when Jabba, remember Jabba? Who remembers the Jabba figure, right? Whose ugly desire. Jabba, right, forces her to dress in a bikini, ties a chain to her, and she's, right, in the most degraded possible way, because he's not doing it with any beauty, right? That's the only scene of sexuality. in Star Wars. The one person who engages the sexual, who falls madly in love with a woman named Padme, Anakin, goes to Yoda to talk about his experience of desire, and Yoda gives him the worst fucking advice in the world, right? Doesn't dignify the desire, doesn't recognize it, doesn't honor it, and what Anakin says, he says, I know our baby's a blessing. And he knows that in his body. My baby's a blessing. And he goes to Yoda, and Yoda says, yada. Yoda doesn't know any yada. Right? Yada means to know. And Yoda says, get rid of those attachments. They lead to the dark side. But it was actually Yoda's advice that led him directly into the arms of Palpatine. And that lives at the heart of culture. That is the story. So you think it's this hidden story. You think it's an old church story. Oh, right, I threw the church off. No, actually, the major cultural enterprise called Star Wars has actually disembodied, right, is filled with the shame of finitude, and basically replaced the warrior priest of the church with the warrior priest of agape, and split Eros and agape. Right? And if we had time, we weren't late, I'd show you a bunch of clips. I won't. Just example 2. Who plays football? Football. Super Bowl. A year and a half ago, I'm at a sports bar with my son because he wants to see the Super Bowl. I hate football, but I love my son. So we're at the sports bar, right? And this commercial comes on, and I'm just watching this commercial, and it's an insurance company commercial, and there are multiple forms of love. I said, wow, this is good. I like football. Well, watch this, right? Right? And it says, and there's, it goes through the different Greek words for love, and it says there's eros, the uncontrollable urge, and you see this hint of a sexual scene, but then there's the great love, which is agape, and you see a young teenager washing the body of an old person. This utter fucking split at the heart of culture between eros and agape, right? The shaming of desire in the middle of the fucking Super Bowl, right? Right after 2 women, quite well known, quite beautiful, each just did a major set in which they essentially did, right, quite striking and beautiful public orgasms on stage, right? Each one of them, right, for about 7 minutes each. So you watch the public orgasm, which was quite beautiful, right, as public orgasms go, right, and for which they got paid fortunes of money, right? So you watch that. You get the double bind at the heart of culture. You watch that, right? 80 million people watch it. Then you turn to the commercial. It says, there's different kinds. There's eros, there's agape. And no, right? Double bind, right? Gregory Bateson, right? You explode. And no one knows why we're exploding, right? So we actually have to heal the narrative of shame. And in our sexual narratives, we have sex negative, gets you in a lot of trouble, it's dangerous, bad shit. There's some truth to that, but certainly doesn't exhaust our experience of sexuality. Sex neutral, Kinsey, kind of like having lunch. How many people think here sex is like having lunch? Okay, that one doesn't work. Right, that one doesn't work. Right, you've got, okay, sex positive. Quite a bland word for the sexual. It's positive. Isn't that nice? It's a positive experience. We're glad, Mr. Bash, that you've had a positive experience. Right? Or a sex sacred. Actually creates babies. Right, so just show of hands. When's the last time anybody in this room had sex to create a baby in the last year? Show of hands. Okay, I end my case. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so those 4 obviously don't exhaust our experience of the sexual. So the most powerful force that exists in reality, we have no story for. The only story we have for it is a shaming story. Right at the very heart of culture, the Super Bowl. I'm not quoting you, right? I'm not quoting you the usual move of spiritual work. Let's quote the church. This is the commercials of the Super Bowl. Right? This is Star Wars, right? Right? It's the story. Right? At the very heart of culture is the shame of finitude. Right? We're humiliated at getting our basic needs and desires met, and yet desire itself is fundamentally shamed. So we have to heal the narrative of desire. We have to heal Eros itself. We have to do a new phenomenology of what Eros itself is. Right? So why are we here? We are because desire is at the heart of reality. So let's call that not sex sacred, because it creates babies, right? Not sex negative, not sex positive, not sex neutral. Let's call that sex erotic. That the sexing that moves in me, that the desire that moves in me is the very same desire that courses through all of cosmos. That urge in me is not a violation of my goodness. Right? It's the very expression of my goodness. And that my aliveness and my goodness are inextricably one. So we can begin to talk about, it's a strange word, about the goodness of our fuck. Now, the goodness of our fuck doesn't argue for who to fuck when. It's not about polyamory or monogamy or celibacy. It's got nothing to do with that. That's not the issue, right? You work it out. Right person, right place, right time. Work out the ethos. God, that's not our conversation here. Our conversation is the essential goodness of desire itself. That when desire moves in me, right, it's interpreted through the frame, right, of my best read of reality, which is the story, which is the mediating prism for my experience. So all of a sudden, we're saying, no. We have to actually realize reality is a love story. And desire, it's not a chaste love story. It's not a virginal love story. Can you imagine that we prize someone for being a virgin? What an insane thing to do. Right? A woman is prized because she hasn't had sex. I mean, do you get the shaming at the heart of culture? Right? I mean, the very notion of virginity. The very notion of virginity is the shame of finitude. What the fuck? Literally. Right? Like, wow. So we need to evolve the very source code of desire because it's actually the shaming of desire that's the root cause of breakdown. Because here's the sentence. Every single collapse of ethics is a collapse of Eros. My friend Daniel just left me a message on Vox. He said, that sense, he said, it's the only ethics I've ever found that's legitimate. It's the only real ontology for ethics, right? All failures in ethics are not because you couldn't follow the rules, because there was a breakdown in Eros, in my experience of my aliveness, right? If I'm filled with Eros, then I act out of the goodness of my Eros. When there's a breakdown in my Eros, when I'm in emptiness, I fill that emptiness with every manner of addiction, with every manner of acting out, right? All breakdowns in ethics result from prior failures of Eros, but the prior failures of Eros are never just personal, they're cultural. They're at the very heart of culture. And it's culture itself has collapsed Eros. So what would it mean to recreate, here's a new word, a culture of Eros? What would it mean to have a politics of Eros, right? Right? What would it mean to actually reclaim at the very heart, right, the goodness of desire itself? So now let's just put it together, the last couple of steps. And it gets crazy beautiful. So when I pleasure myself, or I turn to my beloved and sexing, and I'm filled with my needs, and my beloved, whether that's me, it's my hand, it's my body, or it's my beloved, turns to me and says to me, your need is my allurement, then shame is healed. When I'm filled with the urgency of my need, my mother couldn't lick me, hold me, caress me, right, kiss me the way I needed to be held. And I experience this fundamental humiliation in the meeting of my basic needs. And then, later in life, it all opens up again because the possibility is recreated in the most stunning way. I'm filled with those same urgent needs, emotional, physical, sexual, sensual. And I look into the eyes of my beloved, and they don't even need to say it. I can hear it through every fucking cell in my body. I can hear her whispering. I can hear him whispering, your need is my allurement. Wow. When need becomes fuck, existential risk will disappear. When need becomes fuck, there'll be no more hungry people in the world. Right? Your need is my allurement. For virtually all of the Western world, that experience of your need is my allurement is egocentric. Me, my couple of kids, my husband, a couple of friends, some family, I'm done. So the boundary of allurement is egocentric. So the love story stops at that boundary of allurement. So the universe is not a love story, except for those 13 people. And even then, it's basically rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics, thinly papered over. For the closed, that's the open societies. The closed societies, your need is my allurement is our ethnocentric. China, Russia, Albania, Turkey, the Philippines, Brazil on a bad day or decade. Wow. But imagine that your need is my allurement goes for every human being on the planet. Wow. Wow. Then when need becomes fuck, there's no more hungry people. Right? And imagine that your need is my allurement includes the entire animal world. Right? Wow. Your need is my allurement heals the shame of finitude. And then I begin to realize, animality. So we've healed the shame of finitude in terms of needs. And then I get to animality, and I realize, right, animals don't have choice, right? But let me ask you a question. What's the nature of choice? We pretend that we're choosing everything. We pretend that we're Homo economicus, rational actors, separate selves, and a materialist cosmos making rational choices, and we're super annoyed by sexing. And by animality, that tells us it's not true. Because animals are driven by instinct. They don't make choices. But what if instinct became allurement? Can you feel that? What if I actually realized that the reason we're in this room is not because we chose to be in this room, that there's actually a level, there's 3 levels. We said she comes in 3s, right? Our last couple of minutes, she comes in 3s. And what does she comes in 3s means? Level 1, no choice. Level 2, I choose. Level 3, choicelessness. And I'm actually living through my clarified allurements. Actually, allurement guides my life. That's the soft animal that Mary Oliver's writing about. Right? It's actually allurement. It's clarified allurement that guides my life. And then the last sentence. And then when I'm in sexing and I experience, right, sexing not as sex negative, sex positive, sex neutral, sex sacred, but I experience it as the very sex erotic, the Eros of Cosmos moving through me, then sex is not death. Sex is actually eternity itself. Which is why in that scene that we saw right before the end of the world, Yule turns to Kate, Jennifer Lawrence, it says, desire. And in that moment of desire, 15 seconds that we saw, the fear of death disappeared. Because desire itself is not against eternity. Desire is a quality of eternity. So when we turn to make love and we scream the name of God, right? We've actually transcended death already. We're actually tasting the timeless time and the placeless place. It's actually fully available right here. So all of a sudden, the shame of finitude just gradually dissipated before us. The lack of choice of the animal became the choicelessness. The instinct became allurement. The humiliation of basic needs became your need is my allurement. And death and sex became the eternity of screaming the name of God. Right? Wow. But there's a way. That's the universal love story. Right? You can't heal shame without retelling the very story in which we live. But not a fanciful retelling, not a conjecture. And you got to go crazy with it. You got to footnote every fucking sentence. You got to steelman the opposition. This is why it could be wrong. For these are the 7 reasons people say it's wrong, but this is the response. No New Age, no fundamentalism. That's not going to get us home, right? But we can evolve the very source code itself. And this is our great work together. Can you imagine if we could tell this story? Could you imagine? Right? Could you imagine? Cha.